Last week I had a short work meeting. Lasted about 10 minutes, and on that call I found myself feeling like I wasn't representing myself how I would want to represent myself. I felt like I was coming across as uncertain, and I was very, very concerned about the perception the other person had of me. When I got off that call, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I had a very physical feeling. It was hard to breathe, my chest was tight, and my anxiety levels went up. For me, that feeling of anxiety is something that pulses through my entire body. It's like I can actually feel the adrenaline pumping, and not in a good way. It takes over everything, and I can't focus on anything else. Did anything bad happen after this call? No. Was I even right about the perception this other person had? Who knows? But these types of experiences are ones that I've had over and over and over again in my career. I can remember single emails that would leave me crumpled on the floor for weeks, that would leave me, still to this day, over a decade later, somebody who has to be in the right state in order to even open my inbox, in case it has this impact on my whole system, this physical impact. I once was explaining this to a coach that I had, and they said, you have this immediate response to things, and it's like tiny little things make you feel like you've been stabbed in the heart. And I thought, she gets it. She understands. And it wasn't until last week, at the grand old age of nearly 44 years old, that I heard the term Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. And funny enough, I heard this term twice in the course of the week, completely separate scenarios, completely disconnected, and yet suddenly I thought, here's this thing that explains so much of how I experience the world. And it turns out that a lot of neurodivergent people are experiencing the world in this way. So what is rejection sensitive dysphoria? It is unbearable pain in response to perceived or actual rejection or failure. So it's characterized by this feeling, which I described, of that it's like you've been stabbed, it's like you've been punched. There's a very physical feeling to it. And it always has a trigger, and that trigger is related to this feeling of being rejected, or that you've done something that's meant that you failed in some way. And you might say, well, why is that a neurodivergent thing? Everybody feels like that. Nobody likes criticism, nobody likes failure. The big difference here is the intensity of the pain that is experienced. For a large proportion of my life, I've had conversations with other people about this experience of what I perceived as anxiety. And a lot of people would talk about how they experience such things in their mind, in the way their thoughts are. And I would always be like, no, this bypasses my mind completely. It hits straight to my stomach. I just have these very intense physical feelings that absolutely floor me and stop me from being able to do anything else. And then when people try and help you, they try and help you by logicking their way out of it. Or logicking you out of it. So they'll say stuff like, oh, but how do you know that they didn't, I don't know, that they didn't like what you said, or that you didn't come across well? And then you can tell them why you think they didn't. And they'll say, yeah, but even if that is the case, what are the next steps? And it's like, it doesn't matter what you say. In fact, all these words just overwhelm me even further, because I am experiencing this physical pain that isn't even allowing me to think. Now, I should say that rejection sensitive dysphoria is not a medically recognized condition, and it's also not in the DSM-5. So it's not currently recognized as a diagnostic term. It's also not one of the things that is listed as being a sign of autism or neurodivergence in any way. However, there has now begun to be research done about it. That research is largely qualitative, so researchers are having conversations with people from different groups, sometimes specifically different neurodivergent groups, in order to better understand. And all the things that are coming up are the types of things that I've just described. Signs that somebody is experiencing it might include outbursts. Now, this is never something that I have really done unless really, really forced, but I honestly can barely remember it. But you may have outbursts in the workplace, and a lot of people obviously do struggle to hold things in the workplace. For me, I've done a lot of internalization, and I hold on to it and I hold on to it until I'm in my own space, and then I'm like broken. Days, weeks, months. The other things that is common is withdrawal. That's definitely something that I do. And it's something that we need to do, actually, because we need to heal from whatever is going on. You might find a lot of negative self-talk, and that's something that I certainly experience. And that negative self-talk happens, and then there might also be a lot of rumination, and that's definitely something that happens for me as well, either after an event or before an event too. I'm desperately trying to plan it so I don't have to experience this pain in the future. And there are various triggers that have been identified that are likely to cause this type of physical experience. I've already mentioned rejection, so that might be real or perceived rejection. One thing that I've found is that it's kind of worse if it's something that catches me by surprise. So if I can almost build rejection or failure into a system, then that's something that is okay, that I can deal with that. If it's almost like an idea of, oh, this is experimentation and I'm playing with it and let's see what happens, then that's okay, because that doesn't really feel like rejection or failure. That feels like part of the process. Also, if I still feel in control, then that is okay. Where I struggle is when I see and sense that people are thinking or feeling something. And honestly, generally, I'm kind of right that they're feeling or thinking those things, but they might not say it. So it's like the passive aggression I find even worse. And that really triggers something, because I'm like, I don't know how else to react to this. Obviously, kind of other things, things like gaslighting, bullying, teasing, these are all triggers. But also some of the data talks about this withdrawal of love as well, or feeling of being unloved. And the self-criticism, which is a sign of it, can also be part of the problem. Now, there's many different mood disorders that are also similar to this, but there are ways in which the mood disorders are different. So, for example, with rejection sensitive dysphoria, it's about this instant response to a trigger versus a mood disorder, which may come up at any particular time. The trigger is also something very specific. So it's not just that it's instantaneous, it's also that it's triggered. One of the other things that is said in the research is that with rejection sensitive dysphoria, it goes very quickly. If this is the case, then what I'm experiencing is a mixture of several things, because for me it does not go quickly at all. For me it doesn't go until whatever's triggered it and that perceived failure is resolved, or I'm able to shift forward in some kind of way. So there has to be, for me, some kind of reaction. Now, that might be to do with many other things as well. That might be to do with the fact that perhaps by going through these things, I'm also then triggering mood disorders. I'm triggering anxiety or depression. But also it could be about those decades of experiences that I carry as baggage and the challenges that we have with that. One thing that I read in the research is that this is not to do with trauma. So this is to do with very specific responses at specific points in time. But I don't understand how you can really decouple that trauma. And another thing that was in the research that I guess in some ways is contradictory is that what's going on is actually due to the fact that over decades or years or whatever it is, as a neurodivergent person, an autistic person, that actually when you've had those senses of, oh, this feels like a failure or this feels like rejection, that rejection's very real. There is a much higher risk of actual rejection if you are a neurodivergent person. So this idea that we are more sensitive, that we've got our spidey senses up when it comes to like potential rejection is possibly because we've found ourselves in those situations before, and they're really horrible situations to be in. Some of the other things that come up specifically with autistic people, that this is also about fear of rejection in the future, and I would say that for me this is the biggest thing that I'm experiencing, that when I have those kind of interactions, it's not about in that actual moment. I can kind of deal with that a bit better, but it's about if I'm trying to build towards something and then I have this perception of, oh, this person's going to stand in the way, they're going to be a gatekeeper, they're going to be a barrier that makes this journey a lot harder, then these are the things that can cause me to have a reaction. And related to all of that, also in the research, I read something about re-experiencing emotions, re-experiencing situations where you felt in ways that you didn't want to feel, that was painful. And so there's this horrible, never-ending cycle. A coach I once worked with talked about emotional flashbacks. And so this idea that you would like actually feel the feelings. So if you're in a situation and the way somebody's behaving reminds you of a situation that you've had in the past, then you'll get these emotional flashbacks and you'll actually feel the same way as you did back then. So I've talked about what this is, how it feels. It really doesn't feel very nice. Let me know if this is something that you've experienced or that you've heard of. How does this link with other aspects of dealing with being neurodivergent for you? And for me, it links because this very physical feeling is something that you can't just walk away from. You can't just reason away from. And so that's then what leads to certain self-soothing, and some of those things are not necessarily very helpful. So when I look back now and I think about 15 years of having an eating disorder, including binge eating, it was this feeling that I was trying to stop every single time. I had this reaction and I needed to stop these feelings. Trouble is, when we indulge in unhelpful habits, and whether that be binge eating or other eating disorders, whether that be using alcohol or whatever types of self-soothing you use, you then get into a deeper, darker spiral, and you then have layers of challenges that you need to overcome. You not only have this kind of very physical feeling, but then you are actually doing things to your physicality that create further damage, that create further trauma that you then have to deal with. It's taken me a long, long time to rebuild from some of those things. But I have. And the thing is, those horrible feelings, that rejection sensitivity, that dysphoria is still there. I've learned that suppressing it through that unhelpful self-soothing doesn't work. So what does work? So it's been said that medication can work, and some common ADHD medications can work well for this. I have not tried any medications because I only heard about this a week ago, come on. And I'm only just putting two and two together. And of course I'm not going to sit here, and I have no credibility whatsoever to recommend any kind of medications to anyone for anything other than just seeing what I've read in the research. So if you are experiencing this, then perhaps a conversation with the doctor about medication could be helpful. And I'll link to the papers I've read in the description so you can have a look at them and see if that's going to be helpful if you want to go and talk to your doctor about it. They also say that therapy is helpful. Now, I have been doing therapy for the last 6 months. I've actually just stopped. And is it helpful for this? Well, I'm still experiencing it, and I'm still struggling to know what to do when I do experience it. So from that perspective, no. Has therapy been helpful? I'm thinking of making another video that's specifically just about therapy, so I will come back and do that at a later date, because therapy for autistic people doesn't necessarily work. Now, one of the reasons I chose the therapist that I was working with was because any therapy that focuses too much on too much talking, too much rumination, just tires me out. My brain is okay, my brain is already there. It's the physical responses that I have a challenge with. And so when I have worked with this therapist, she's done things like saying, well, what's that feeling trying to tell you? What is it? Can you just sit with it? And One of the hard things about that is that I'm like, I know what it's trying to tell me. I already know that, like, in my head. I just don't know how to make this horrible feeling go away, and I don't know how to make it stop being the most all-encompassing thing. And actually sitting with it or talking to somebody about it isn't necessarily the thing that makes it go away. I think the things that actually make it go away for me are exercise can be really helpful, which is one of the reasons why I think I've been struggling with it over the last couple of weeks, because I've had a virus and I haven't been able to exercise. So exercise helps because it physically changes your state, and this is a physical feeling. Other things that help, different kind of ritualistic things. So I really find EFT tapping helpful because, again, it sort of changes the physical state. And then looking towards something new, that can be really helpful. So vision boarding, meditating, all of that stuff really helps me. So anything that helps me sort of clear it out and look towards something new, not just looking back on an experience that was painful. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about designing your life, because there are certain times where you're going to find yourself in situations over and over again that you consistently feel that you are being put down, that you are getting these perceptions of rejection. And that might be because of the type of people you're around. I've found that I've really struggled with it when I'm in a workplace with people who are very controlling, who don't give you space to showcase your strengths, who don't listen, just basically where there's pretty bad behavior in the workplace and toxic environments. Now, one thing I want to say about toxicity is certain things there are objectively things that make a workplace not a great place to be for anyone. But there are other aspects that for some people they're absolutely fine with, and for other people it's a real struggle and it will make the workplace completely unbearable. So for me, I've had to do a lot of work around self-awareness, figuring out what works for me, what doesn't work for me. When I do get these feelings that come up, I really trust them and I go, oh, there is something going on here. What needs to change? And usually I know what needs to change, and it's about giving me that kick up the ass to actually make those changes. And that's not about just putting this on everybody else. It's not about saying like, oh, well, they talked to me in this way and that's not okay, or they did this. No, it's about actually looking at it through a totally different lens. Step back from those one-to-one conversations or those individual interactions and say, what do I want my life to look like? What scenarios would there be where I wouldn't have this perceived rejection, or where this type of thing just wouldn't matter as much? So I think that self-awareness really matters. I think your environment really matters, because you shouldn't live your whole life feeling this pain. And I guess I accept to some extent that I'm going to have reactions and then I'm going to find ways to move on from that. But if you are in a situation where you don't even have a chance to recover and you don't have a chance to work on the things that really matter to you and that you really care about because you're constantly trying to fight this, then environmental change would be helpful. I know that's easier said than done. And I have certainly found myself in those situations where I'm feeling something extreme and you feel like you're so trapped in that particular environment because you don't have the energy, because you keep experiencing these things, so all you can do is try and get through the days. But believe me, small steps, one step at a time, you can shift things, you can change things around. And then related to that, I think also recognizing that you do have a need for recovery, and that's okay. And recovery and healing from these situations might look different for different people. So again, trying to figure out what that looks like for you. And some of that is the withdrawal we talked about at the beginning. How do you just take yourself away, distract yourself with something that's not feeling like it's getting you all flared up? If you keep going back out there into a difficult environment when you're feeling like you have an open wound, then it's only going to make things worse. So for me, hermiting is really important for several reasons, but particularly in this, go back in. What can you do in your own space, in your own time? What feels nurturing for you? And that might not be walking away from work altogether. That's just building up some walls, some protective areas around you. What can you go back to that actually makes you feel confident? And finally, I want to say, you do what works for you. There's a lot of things that I hear where people will give advice that's meant to be helpful, that's possibly backed by research, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's appropriate for everyone in the population. And so, for example, I've often thought about perfectionism and why I need to have a certain level of, it isn't just that good enough, why I need to be at a certain point, where I need a certain level of preparedness that seems like more than other people need. And it's because, to me, the pain that you get is so significant that I'd rather not move forward at all than experience that pain. So perfectionism is actually about trying to protect myself from experiencing that pain as I move forward. So I really hope that by sharing this, I've helped you better understand something. Like I said, I've only found out about this a week ago. There is not an awful lot in the research about this, and I am not an expert. I'm just somebody who's had these experiences, and this resonated with me. Let me know in the comments if you want me to talk about this kind of thing moving forwards, and if you have any further questions. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.